We need a cute little do 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 do. So my Jeopardy theme is going over really well, and you're welcome, everyone. And anybody logged on, feel free to use the chat. We're going to be answering questions that we got in the RSVP forms, but we're also going to open it up to questions. And you know, if you have a burning question about the project, we might cover it in the first couple of minutes, but it's always good to get it out there to make sure that we cover it in the hour that we have with you today. We're also going to be doing this a bunch of different times. We're going to be traveling to do in-person sessions for anybody who is either sick of Zoom or doesn't have access to, you know, stable internet or those kinds of things. And we're going to be doing a second virtual information session towards the end of the proposal intake period. And so this isn't your last chance to communicate with us by any means. And so we've got a couple of months to sort of field questions and get people briefed about the new grant program. But feel free to use the chat, plug a question in, and we're going to try to get to it at least by the end of the session today. So. We're at 104, I think leave it to 105. We've got 20 people logged in, and then, so in about 1 minute, we're gonna get started. Cool, y'all wanna do this? I'd say let's start with introducing ourselves. So we've got Allison Schaub facilitating for us today, and the three of us, Peter, Jackie, and I, are from the 3 partner organizations for the Verdant Fund. And we can do a quick introduction of ourselves, and then Jackie's gonna play an informational video that we put together. So I'm Elizabeth Elliott. I'm the executive director here at Alabama Contemporary Arts Center.
I'm Peter Prince, Space 11. I'm the CEO and co-founder, celebrating our 35th year of making art.
I'm Jackie Clay. I am the executive director and a co-director team at the Coleman Center for the Arts. And I will, other than the video, I may mute myself quite a bit because we have trains coming by that can be loud. It's just an FYI. So I'll go ahead and, okay.
Yeah. I'm getting a notice that my connection is unstable. So if I freeze up, that's pretty sure I'm frozen.
How's that sound for folks? I'm gonna come back up real quick.
I couldn't hear it that first time.
Okay, here we go. Give me just a second. Okay. How's it sounding for folks now?
Good.
Okay.
Good.
Cool. So thank you to Kelsey Harrison for making that awesome little video for us. And the hope is, in showing that first, is that it might have answered some of the initial questions. And I also think it's great to sort of get a more illustrated scope of the kinds of projects that the Verdant Fund is looking to support. So if we want to now, and how am I? Am I freezy?
No.
Okay, good. So what we can do is we can go ahead and go through the sample application and the sample budget, and maybe point out a few things, and then dive into questions. But if you missed it at the beginning, please use the chat to type out any questions that you have at the bottom of the screen. So we're going to address all the ones that were submitted in the RSVP link, but you can also submit your question in the chat if it just now occurred to you, or if you really want to make sure that we're going to address it today. So why don't I start with the website and the submission process? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I think most people can figure this out for themselves. Where are we? We're at the wrong one. Do you guys see Verdant Fund right now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So the first page is just general about what we do. If you go to grants, is the project grant. So the first year that we opened was an emergency grant. And that's the only year we're really going to do emergency grants unless the world ends in a similar way. So from henceforth, the Verdant Fund is intended to be a project grant. And so you can skip directly to the project grant section. This is actually a link that takes you to Submittable. You can go through the application timeline, their information sessions, a bunch of information about how to apply, how projects are going to be reviewed. And once you go through all of this and sort of prepare your materials, this is the bulk of what your materials will be needed is a project summary description. Make sure you have an updated CV or resume, a project budget, and an idea of like how to articulate what you need financially to realize the project. And then you're going to need 5 work samples. Once you have all of that pretty much gathered and you're ready, you're going to actually apply through Submittable. And Submittable requires you to set up an account through them. And it's a format that a lot of open calls use. So once you set up that account, if you don't have one already, you'll be able to apply for other open call funding or opportunities, or you may very well just log in with one that you've used for another opportunity. Basically, all the same information should be in Submittable as what's on the website. And so you don't need to go click through all the way to Submittable to find this information. It was all on the last page that we showed you. And then when you go in to submit, this is what the form is going to look like. And so you just start filling out all of these slots. And on the back end, let me, my phone Acrobat. This is what it ends up looking like when you're all finished. And so this is an example of my personal genius is this project example that I put together, which is kind of ridiculous, but also kind of keeping in mind some of the things that we're looking for. And you're just gonna have to parse out the difference. But DJ Randy Hot and Handy has this project concept that he put together. And so this gives you an example of how to approach each section. So the bulk of it is project description and figuring out how to articulate your ideas in a way that's compelling to the jurors and really is in line with what you hope to accomplish with the funding. Is one of the big things. You just upload your project budget once you fill it out, and then your image files. So DJ Randy didn't do all 5, and so he's probably not going to make it through, and didn't follow the title instructions. But for the most part, this gives you an idea. We really wanted the application process to be thorough, but not exclusionary, not too much that, you know, it's impossible to get done. It shouldn't take you, you know, a full-time job to apply for the grant, depending on the scope of your idea. So the last thing I want to show you guys is the budget template. And we provided this template. It's based on, like, there's a bunch of other regional regranting programs through the Warhol Foundation. We're really lucky to be part of a very large cohort of other organizations that have really worked out a lot of this before us, so that we're not reinventing the wheel, and we have the benefit of all of their years of experience and learning doing regional regranting. And so a lot of our grant processes are begged, borrowed, and stolen from those other regional regranters who were generous enough to share their processes with us. And this is a really useful tool if you've never had to write a project budget, or if you have to write other kinds of project budgets. This is a really classic way to break it down, and it gives you everything in categories already set for you, so you don't have to invent categories or figure out too much. It should be pretty intuitive. And so if there's specific equipment that you have to buy for a project, you know, there's a line for that. Artist fees, print matter. We attempted to account for everything in this budget template. Not everything. It's not a perfect science. And so there are going to be projects where there's going to be things that seem like they could fit in a couple different kinds of categories. And mostly it's going to be up to you to figure out what makes sense to your project. And primarily this is a communication tool. So it's a group of panelists and jurors that are going to be reading this. And the goal is that they have a good idea, not only that you know what you're doing in your ask, if you're asking for $5,000, that you know how to spend that $5,000 in a way that actually accomplishes your goals. But also that you've really thought through the project, that you're not just throwing a number out into the air of like, yeah, I'm gonna do this art project and I need $5,000. So we really want you and expect you to take the time to think through what the real costs are gonna be. That's not to say that we don't want you financially benefiting from the project, but you can't ask for $5,000 and it all be an artist fee. And there would be no other costs, because for a lot of panelists, that's going to be a red flag that you haven't really thought about the direct costs involved. Yeah. I see a bunch of questions starting to come into the chat. What I'm going to start doing, I want to start with what people typed into the RSVP. And if you give me just a second, I'm going to pull up that. And we can start with those questions, unless Jackie, do you have anything you want to chime in about anything that I just said?
No, and I've been skimming the questions also. So we'll do those RSVP questions, and then we'll go down the list from the top. I think one of the first that came in was from Jillian. So we'll get to Jillian's question after we had about 3 early questions in the RSVP form.
Okay, cool. The first question we got in the RSVP form is, if you propose a project that involves more than one artist, should all of those artists be selected already? Is there a preference for a group for group projects compared with individual projects? The answer is no, there isn't a preference. Each individual doesn't need to submit a separate application. It should be one proposal as a group with a lead artist. So you don't need to worry about other people being selected. You'd be selected or not selected as a group. There's no real preference between an individual project and a group project, other than it's fair to assume that the jurors are going to be looking at how each person is necessary to the project. And so don't submit a group project if it's not a project that really needs a group to fulfill, or if the lead artist is taking such a heavy leadership role in it. But there's tons of collaborative projects and a wide scope of things that make a lot of sense that can only come from a group or collective. So I'd say the priority is to think through your actual project and your project goals, and make sure that the creative labor that's engaged in the project makes sense to those project goals. You know, there's also situations where you might want to submit something as an individual that really makes more sense to sort of happen from a collective space, or that the project could be stronger for it. So it's very subjective. And I'm pulling up the next question, but Jackie, you can chime in at any point.
Yeah, I have no additions to make. That was a great reflection of our prep earlier today.
Yeah. So the next question we have, I am interested in this grant for a community project that I've been developing for 2 years. I've not been able to begin the project because of equipment needs that are beyond my budget. I won't be able to achieve the scale of work I hope for with this project without receiving grant funding for equipment, so that would affect the space size needs. With that said, do I need to secure a physical space that could host the exhibition of the artwork prior to applying for the grant, or is this something I could work on after I apply? Again, this is subjective. I would say that, and we've discussed that having things like spaces defined for the public facing components of your project will make for a stronger proposal than if there's a lot of details that are still in the wind. We understand that you might not want to go and sign contracts and get commitments for something that's yet to be funded, but you should want to show the jury in the selection process that you've thought through the kinds of space that is needed, and that you've done your legwork and your homework on getting the project cited. So I would think more in terms of what's going to make for a competitive project proposal. And if it's possible to define those terms, that's actually, I think a lot of jurors and panelists are going to find that a lot more stable and comfortable, and have more confidence in that project proposal than they would if there are a bunch of unknowns floating around in the concept. Cool. We had one more, and it's going to take me just a minute. Oh, yes, we're recording this meeting. I think that's it. Oh, here it is. How do you find public engagement? Can you propose an exhibition at one of the organizations who are partners with the fund, i.e. Space 111, Alabama Contemporary? No, none of the partners Jackie, Peter, I, and none of our organizations are selecting the final proposals, and none of us would be hosting the public-facing components. We are partnering in administrating the fund, but the ultimate goal is that it goes out into the state of Alabama and extends our reach into communities and impacts communities outside of our three organizations. How we define public engagement is also subjective. It's going to be up to a certain extent to the jury and panelists that are reviewing these proposals. I can say from a field standpoint, we're looking for projects and prioritizing projects that have a deeper level of engagement, dialogue, or community relationship than just viewership, full stop. And so when we say we prioritize public community engagement and public engagement, we're really looking for projects that go beyond just viewership as their primary source of engagement.
Yes, and I would also add for folks that are zooming in from rural communities, you know, Elizabeth used a great word, deep engagement versus like lots. Like it, you know, if you're in a community where there isn't 500,000 people, you know, I don't think the jurors are going to say, well, this project that is a performance that would have a large audience versus a community that has, you know, fewer potential people that could be audience or participants. The audience numbers isn't the only way we're measuring the depth and the quality of that engagement, just to say that. So maybe we can go to the chat. The first question there is there a recommendation for how much of the funding should go toward public-facing aspects of the project versus other aspects of the project? So there's a couple things I would say. First, this is our first year doing project grants. And I'll repeat this a couple times because it is coming up in some of the questions about like what has happened in the past, or, you know, we're making, we're building this bridge as we cross it. But I will say around like strong budgets, like a strong, well-articulated budget, it would take into account labor, you know, so I can anticipate that our jurors will be uncomfortable with projects that, don't pay people equitably. And public facing, like when we were invited into the Warhol process, you know, they use the example of some folks have done like podcasts, some folks have done public events, some folks have done the process is the project proposal less than the exhibition of the work later on. So there's a lot of different ways it can be articulated, and as a result, a lot of different ways your budget can function. What I'd say is, especially as you get closer to application, or if you're able to attend these additional question and answers, if there's some more direct questions about your budget, we want we want these applications to be as strong as possible. We're not making the final choices, so we want whatever we bring to that panel to be great, and we want to help you in that process. Okay, so you want me to read the next one? This is from Allison, that it was in the question and answer section. I am not a student. This is from Shannon. I am not a student, but my 19-year-old daughter is. Could I submit with the project in my name, but she participate with me in it? Is that right that students cannot submit for project grants, even if they are not submitting for school? Your constituency, like your public facing audience, can be people under 18, you know what I mean? But I think what really Warhol is trying to do with us as regranters is find a way to fund folks who sometimes don't have avenues for funding and support. And that is typically people who are out of school. So it's not so much exclusionary to students as in they don't have any value. I think we all value the youth. Yeah. But what we're trying to do is if your daughter is like, if your daughter is part of the audience, or if it's a project that is public facing and you're working with youth, that is, we're not excluding any particular audience, but we're really trying to make opportunities for folks who don't traditionally have funding opportunities.
Yeah, I'd say also extending professional practice is a big part of this. So there are resources, and you can argue that there are not enough arts and culture resources across the board anywhere. The purpose of this grant can't be to be all things to all people or to fill every gap, but one of the big gaps that's in line with the Warhol Foundation mission and our organization missions is how we can propel professional practice that's under-resourced, and generally the kinds of projects that don't have a venue already or don't have support systems in place already. And so that's also a good test as to whether your project is a fit for this grant, is to think about if there's already support systems in place for the kind of work you're looking to do for this project. And we're instructing our panelists and our juries really to look at sort of the critical merit of projects, but also how likely is this to get funded through another program or supported in another way, or happen without this grant, because we really want this money to be meaningful in seeding things that couldn't happen otherwise, or that would struggle in obscurity without the support.
Do you want me to go to the next question?
Yeah.
So this is from April Livingston. After your talk, could you talk about work samples? Question. Also, is this grant renewable for one time only? Meaning, if you got it this year, could you apply again next year? Thanks. So I'm going to address the second part first. Well, I'll just do it. Work samples. Having been on panels before, you want images that are images or documentation that is clear, that is high quality, and that either represents what you're applying for or has some relationship to it. So for example, if I am a curator, which is true, and I was applying for a project grant, I would not necessarily include a writing sample versus a photo of exhibitions that I have curated. Do you know what I'm saying? So like, I'm gonna include, although these are all parts of my practice, I'm gonna include the things that are going to have the closest relationship to the proposal I'm making, because that's gonna help that panel, because most likely the panel is not gonna be familiar with many of our applicants' process. That's the point. We want to kind of bring people, we want to introduce folks to your work, and we want to maybe have a little bit more distance around the process. Okay, so the second part is the grant renewable? My belief is no. Is that true, Elizabeth?
I'd say it's a project grant, so it really depends on the project, but we, I think you are going to be excluded from the applicant pool in the year directly following a successful funding application. And so if you get selected, if your project gets selected this year, you won't be able to apply with a new project the following year. You will have to take a year off before you bring a new project to the table, but it's always going to be project based. It's not, the funding isn't centered around your creative practice so much as it is the goals and outcomes of a specific project proposal. So that's always what's going to make a difference. And we are going to have a standard against double dipping, so that the same artists don't get this project grant over and over again every year.
So the next question is, can you talk about how a group of artists who want to work together, for example, to stage a screening of multiple films, should approach the application process? Yeah, this is a question that we were prepped for by our predecessors, and kind of what they've done is you want to identify a lead artist who would be our contact point. And then there's really no limits when it comes, you know, we're not saying like it's ideal to have a 4-person cooperative or a 50-person, but that lead artist is going to be our point of contact. And you want that person to have the kind of like, they'd be your administrator. So like think it doesn't necessarily even have to be, however you're organizing as a body, just think of who's going to be responsible and responsive, you know?
Yeah. So the lead artist is crucial, but also DJ Randy Hot and Handy, this sample application, he's enlisted a sound artist in that project, in that sample imaginary project. And so that project application gives you a good model of make sure that your lead artist, that you're in your application, you're articulating the role and of the lead artist, but also the role and reason for inclusion of everybody else who's involved in it. And, you know, that doesn't mean that like, you know, all of the labor has to be divided perfectly equally, depending on the project. Like a screening could be lower impact labor wise than, you know, large scale collaborative social practice event where each person is like contributing a different role to an event-based program. So it really like it varies project to project. Just make sure that you have a lead artist you can trust that answers emails and responds to questions and is responsible. And you also have thought through each role thereafter and why that person is included in the project.
So the next question from Melissa, is preference given to projects that are partially funded from other sources or to those who have no other funding? No, there's no preference given. Warhol funds organizations and there is no match, and we would reflect that also. But your budget, I think your budget is important, you know, in the same way we're talking about, like you want to represent labor equitably. If you want to represent, is the scale of the project reasonable, and like, can it get done for the amount of money you're asking for? You know, things like that. That's going to affect how the panel receives and has faith in the proposal. Is there other things you'd like to add, Elizabeth?
No, that's
okay.
Good.
Do you share how many projects will be selected and how many applicants are received historically? Basically, what do the odds look like? Okay, so Shannon, just to repeat from a few moments ago, this is our first year doing project grants. I don't know how many applicants we're gonna get. That's the short answer. And we didn't say a number of awards because what happens within the panel, and this is again these are lessons we've learned from our predecessors, is that we know that we have a bucket of, at this moment, $60,000. We, you know, and that panel is going to try. Traditionally, a panel is trying to award the maximum amount of folks. You know, so they're going to look at like the strongest proposals, try and give partial. You know, that's what the process usually looks like. We want to get this money out the door. We want to fund your exciting projects. We don't know because there's no history yet from our Alabama-based re-granting process. You know, we could give you some information about other states or other cities, but it doesn't necessarily reflect what's going to happen here.
Yeah, we will share what the projects, once we have a pool of projects that are awarded, we will be sharing those annually. And if you check back in 5 years, we'll probably have a great answer to this question. You know, right now, the only thing we can say is that your odds are probably pretty good, so long as your project is well thought out and in line with our funding goals, the kinds of projects that we're trying to fund. You know, and it's also, even though we have no information about that to share with you, that's a brand new grant that's only going to get more competitive the older it gets. And it's congratulations on everyone who's here. Like, you should apply.
The next question is from Regina. Regarding budget for print digital, is this dollar figure produced with the exhibiting art center's input, i.e., is this budget line an advertising budget? I'm not totally clear on the question, but I will say one kind of thing to restate is we won't be funding projects that are generated from 501c3s that are like part of an institution's program. So these should be independent of the Coleman Center, independent of the Birmingham Museum of Art, independent of, you know, do you know what I'm saying? So that's like one piece of it.
Yeah, and I think she's referring to the print digital on our budget template. So in line with what Jackie said, we're looking and prioritizing projects that happen outside of institutions as well as typical commercial galleries. So this isn't a project grant for the solo exhibition that would or would not get hosted otherwise. It's a project grant for when you want to fill a derelict building with your paintings and invite a specific population to come paint on top of them. Just to give you a really like hacky example of like the difference. So the budget is something you are putting together, we're assuming all on your own. Since we're trying to fund projects and programs outside of typical support systems, you know, you wouldn't have a 501c3 or institution that would be telling you what the print matter, and you might not have print matter. There's also a fair amount of this project grant, you know, 90% of what you're applying for could be research based, where you're developing a concept, so long as the last 10% is public facing. And public facing also doesn't mean a traditional audience at an event. So you don't have to have like an exhibition opening. You could open up your research to a specific community to sort of participate and answer questions, and where they have access to the information and are participating in the project in a meaningful way. And that's public facing. So the short answer is you probably won't get any input on what print is necessary, digital or print PR is necessary for your project, but that also means you shape that based on your project. And so if you're doing a research collaboration in a community, you might not need posters for it. That might not make sense to that kind of project, versus you're doing a big event where your primary community engagement is getting them to one place at one time. Then you might want to commit a bunch of money to a print and media campaign to make that successful. So you should think about your project goals and what's going to, you know, really get you to those goals from a budgetary standpoint.
We got more questions coming in. It's flowing. It's good energy. So the next question from Karen, and then we have two additional ones after that. Can the project involve international collaboration, as in involvement between Alabama and Cuban social issues? And this connects with, actually, I skipped one that was like, must the project stay in Alabama or can it extend beyond the state? So tying those two together and just saying this, it's kind of important that the emphasis be placed in the state, you know. I wouldn't say that either of these examples are barring concerns, especially with the can it start in Alabama and go somewhere else. But part of the reason we got this money is because they really want to fund artists and the community's access to art practice in the state, you know? So that doesn't prohibit some international or cross-border, and by border I mean like Mississippi and Georgia, collaboration or kind of projects that extend beyond that. but you don't want the Alabama portion of this to be an aside. It should be like kind of a central part of what's happening.
Yeah. So an Alabama artist, one of the stipulations is the lead artist has to be from Alabama. You could have a lead artist in and from Alabama that is bringing Cuban cultural material into the state and broadening conversation and audience in that way, that's collaborating with Cuban artists, so long as the central impact is for Alabamians, and vice versa. Like, you know, you can do lots and lots of things, but you know, the Andy Warhol Foundation has 30 other regional regranting programs in different states and cities, and the regional regranting program and the core mission of the funding that's coming here is for it to benefit the state, artists in the state, increase cultural production in the state, and give access to the arts for audiences in the state of Alabama.
So our next question is from Tony. Is there a time frame for a project to be completed? 1 year, 2 years after being awarded the grants? Thanks. Yes.
Hi, Tony.
Yes, it has to be this year. The year of the award, excuse me.
Yeah. So we guesstimate from the time that we say, hey, here, have a pile of money, that's then starts the timer on a year. There are kinds of projects that are multiple years in the making. What you can do if you have a project like that is you want to set out specific goals that are achievable in the year with some public facing component of it. So it might be, you know, 1 year of what you consider in your artistic practice to be like a 5-year engagement, but you need discernible goals and deliverables and achievements that you can apply for and get funded that happen within the space of 1 year. That it might propel forward from there. You don't lose all of the things that you did in that year, obviously. So there's lots of room for that kind of trajectory and growth, but we're funding things for a year.
A question from Elizabeth. Hello, would it be possible for the project to exist online and qualify as interactive, i.e. downloading a 3D scan for free? I do think a lot of folks think of the internet or apps as alternative exhibition spaces. And I think the argument around it being social and public is not a hard one to make. So I would say yes. But I would guess also the panelists would really push you on like how would folks access it, find information about it, who is the audience, things like that. You know, so yeah. Make sure to strengthen those things within the application.
Yeah, and making, like, if we come back to the Alabama thing, that, and you would want to make sure that like you're thinking through how this is relevant to an Alabama audience and specifically impactful to an Alabama audience, lest your application gets shuffled down the list for not being competitive in that specific way that's in line with, you know, the funding.
And just to emphasize again, some themes that have come up and connects to this and almost like repeat Elizabeth from a moment ago. This is a project grant. So when I think of like ASCA or even South Arts, much of their granting or funding to artists is almost a fellowship. So an overarching support of one's practice. And that's not what our project grants are. It's about funding a specific project, sometimes in collaboration with multiple artists, sometimes in collaboration with community. It's not so much a reflection or support or honorific to an overarching creative practice.
Oh, there's this whole other section of Q&A that's
Allison
not the
is,
chat.
well, Allison has been sending it over, so we've been
Okay,
responding
good.
to it too.
I'm like,
So there was a few, we were talking kind of before, and I was gonna throw out a few things, even like the person who asked a moment ago about students being, and I just want to emphasize that if you like want to work with young people, kind of technical education isn't always the strongest application, because there's lots of other funding opportunities for that. But this is, I'm not telling you guys to do this. This is just a kind of an example of something that I'm near positive is Warhol funded, and is an example of kind of like innovative thinking about public projects and art practice and creative practice. So that isn't like exclusionary to any age group and emphasizes kids. Okay, here's another question. Is the criteria for this year's project fund specific to this year? Will the project criteria change year to year? It is specific to what would be the, the funds will go out at the end of this year and specific to 2022. It is possible it will change in the sense of, the has evolved over the years. We are learning the most recent lessons from that process. So it may change in the sense of like, we'll be better, more equitable, more transparent, we'll be more knowledgeable in the future. But at this moment, we're not, it will almost always be a project grant. And also we likely won't necessarily do project grants around themes, which is another thing that happens sometimes, just to say that.
yeah, I wouldn't look for a big identity change, because a lot of how this project grant is identified is directly tied to the Warhol Foundation's priorities for the regional regranting. So there might be tweaks. I mean, there might be, a year where we're like, okay, we are really going to prioritize projects that benefit rabbits because all the rabbits are gone and we need bunny rabbits to survive on the planet Earth. And where there's a contextual shift for a year in priority, but generally that's going to be small shifts. That's not going to be like a big fundamental, we're not funding art anymore, we're funding, text messaging.
Yeah. Elizabeth's improvisation. It's wild. Okay, we have another question. Sure. Okay, so this person is specifying an earlier question. If you work in Alabama regarding a specific environmental topic and want to disseminate the project via a website to be able to download scans, would that fit? Sorry if I am redundant. I will just say this, and this is why I said the kind of symphony for broken orchestra. We were talking when Peter and Elizabeth and I met earlier, we were talking about future farmers. There is a way to always frame things in relationship to, in your case, like environmental topics, and then like creative practice that precedes you, that makes for a very strong application. So I would look at like, who are the folks that have done work like this in the past? How can I articulate how they're influencing my practice, and what will this fund extend, within my work and within this community? You know what I'm saying? So like, yeah.
Yeah, how you're extending an existing conversation, I think, and adding to it. So yeah, I'd say, yeah, I mean, I'd love to see that fleshed out project proposal. And really, like, the priority in this project grant is for sort of visual arts that sit outside of typical venues. And so there's a lot of room to sort of explore research, civic and social practice, and event territories around the arts in ways that, you know, are untraditional. And this is one project grant that is like where, you know, untraditional is cool. That like we're looking for artists whose practice and whose project ideas sit outside of the box. So yeah, we're right at, we've got about 4 minutes left in the hour. If you guys have more questions, you better type them up quick. I will say, we want to make sure to share our gratitude about the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts for including us in the regional regranting program. If you have any questions, and it's also probably really useful for you guys in researching and preparing your projects. If you want to go to the Andy Warhol Foundation's website, you can click on the regional regranting program. You can see a whole slew of regional regranters, many of which have been around a lot longer than us. During 2020, they doubled the program. So I think they had about a dozen to 15 existing regional regranters all over the United States, and they doubled that number to over 30 now. So we're one of the newbies, and we appreciate you letting us really kind of cut our teeth here and learn as we go. But we're so grateful to the Andy Warhol Foundation for investing money in Alabama cultural production. There aren't resources. That's one of the big reasons that all three of us really wanted to be a part of this regranting program, is that it's really wildly unique in the state as an opportunity. And it's a kind of opportunity that we really need in the state of Alabama.
We have 3 quick questions coming in.
Okay, I'll quit waxing poetic, but.
Okay, so the first question from Karen is the video someplace that we can watch it? Yes, it will be. And also this question and answer will be on our website also. So venues outside of, from Cynthia, so venues outside of museums and traditional art spaces are less than ideal. Just again, it cannot be 501c3s. It cannot be part of an institution's program. So like, if you were renting a space, I guess that's possible, but that's not, I would just push you on like how it's public. If the traditional museum or traditional art space is seen as public and fully accessible, and if this is something outside of their program, that's the important piece. You know, I don't think we're like ascribing venues or barring certain venues, but the most competitive applications are public. And that means like accessible in all sorts of types of way.
Yeah. So I would say outside of a museum is more competitive than inside of a museum. Just because a museum tends to support the things that happen inside of it. And you'd have a hard time justifying that you need outside support when you're inside an institution.
Like they should be paying you. That's what we're saying. If you were doing something in their space and they're not paying you, that is a problem.
Yeah. Which, in that note, if to go along to sort of extend the question earlier, if this project grant will fund things in our organizations, it won't. But you can apply separately with a project to Alabama Contemporary Arts Center, Space 111, or Coleman Center for the Arts, and it not through the Verdant Fund. The Verdant Fund wants to fund things that happen on rooftops and back alleys and all kinds of places outside of our organizations. But if you have a project concept that you really want at ACAC in Mobile, you contact us through the ACAC website separately. And to echo what Jackie said, the institution should support that work on its own.
And one last
So-
question, would it be a conflict of interest, from Tony, would it be a conflict of interest for me to apply for a project grant if I am already scheduled for an exhibition with one of your organizations? No, I don't think so. We're also, again, I just want to say this again, we are not deciding at all.
Picking.
Peter, Jackie, Elizabeth are not. We will probably do a pass to make sure you have all the materials that are appropriate, but we're not and that's not something even just unique to us. That is how many of most of the grantors function. We're just the facilitator to that money. We're not really making decisions. Yeah. Before I go, I was just going to say, because South Arts has come up a couple times, and just to say this, reflecting on it, because I was a panelist this past year, everybody, all these artists, you got to apply to you should apply for the fellowship every year. And I'm just saying that because when I did it this year as a panelist, which is completely separate from Verdant, I'm just using, just cross-pollinating here, but Alabama had fewer applicants than a lot of other states. So just throwing that out there too. All of these things, all of these opportunities that are floating around, we want you to be putting yourself out there as much as possible and sharing your work as much as possible, because rising tide raises all ships. So.
Amen. Okay, 2:02. Thank you everyone for being here. You can email info@verdantfund.org if you have any residual questions. Go to the website, check out all of the information, go to the Andy Warhol Foundation's website for the regional regranting for a much broader umbrella context. And you have until October 31st to get your application, your project fund application in. And as we can, we're happy to answer questions and help you get your ideas articulated in this process. So thank you. All done?
Hi, everybody.
Have a great weekend.
Ooh, is that what's happening?
Yeah. Uh-huh.